Hello, everybody. Adrian Plass here.
Yes, and Bridget, hello.
And I believe today is number 165
Yes,
in Sounding the Shadows.
it is, and I was delighted. This is becoming a friend, really, letting us know something interesting with every single number. And apparently Neptune, planet,
Yes.
not the Roman god, the planet, needs about 165 years to orbit the sun.
Did he ask it that?
I don't know. But you know why I love this one particularly? Because when I'm really struggling and when I think I know what God ought to do, I always think, yes, but I couldn't actually keep the planets moving around the sun. I couldn't actually keep the world turning on its axis. I couldn't actually. And I know that there's so many programs now, and there was one just recently on television all about the black hole, and physicists and various experts of all sorts trying to work out how the world began and everything. And there's a bit of me thinks, well, you go ahead and you do your calculations, but I am still amazed that
Well, as your faith began with a tiny little yellow flower.
that's true. Blue flower.
Blue flower, sorry. So these massive things are perhaps an expanded version of that you look at things with wonder and think, gosh, this is amazing.
Well, we
Whoever
came
made
across
it.
this wonderful video, didn't we, or film about the planets. There are 8 planets in the universe. Do you
In the
remember?
solar system.
In the solar
there are
system.
8 planets in the solar system.
Yes, and
That's
if
how
you're
it begins.
really struggling yourself, I think, to feel that maybe God wasn't involved, even just this silly little video just reminds me how extraordinary it all is.
But it is humiliating to think that I'm 75 years old this week and I have still not quite grasped which planets are in which order. I mean, it's ridiculous. But this song, which I think is intended for children,
Yes.
is really helpful. So from now on, we're going to look at children's information things. Rather like, do you remember John Craven's News Round? When
of
John
course I do.
Craven used to, the big People's News came on, and before that, John Craven would very helpfully tell us what was actually going on. He'd say some people are getting very angry in a country, or whatever it was.
Yeah, and I think a lot of adults will have thought, so that's what's going
So
on.
that's
Because
what's
when you
going
have
on,
to
yeah.
explain something to children, you make sure you've got it simple. And that's really what this film was about. But yeah, no, so thank you for that. Neptune, 165 years to orbit the sun.
Right. Thank you very much. I hope this chap doesn't spend the entire week in books and Googling and just to find out.
I don't
something
mind.
for our
I think it's
number.
brilliant fun.
Well, I
really.
appreciate it very
Yeah.
much. Yes, the whole theme of wonder, total wonder, is an interesting one. And every now and then I look at people walking around in the marketplace or in the street, and I look at their faces and I think there is not really a look of wonder on their faces. Maybe they're very busy. But when you're a child, when you're a small child, I mean, I remember waking up on Christmas morning and feeling around the presents at the end of my bed. And that was a
wonder.
feeling of absolute
Yeah.
wonder that something, whether it was the man in a red suit who came down the chimney or not, somehow these things had appeared, and I was so thrilled by it.
And didn't you see something just recently about a woman who had demencia?
It was,
was
it was
lost,
a man, yeah.
really. A man.
I
Sorry.
can't. No. The man was talking about it, and I can't
okay.
remember if it was his mother or not. It was. I only caught it briefly, but he was talking about the dementia had robbed her of her wonder, perhaps in life, because she'd lost track of what was going on, really.
Yeah.
And then she was watching a magic trick, which was probably a very simple one. And suddenly he saw in her eyes the old wonder. And it's the same wonder. The fact that it was might have been a very simple trick wasn't the point. So she saw it. And so she still had within her the mechanism of wonder. And I find that very thrilling in a way that you retain. It's like we've often said, people who've lost people they love, they retain the capacity for laughter. Doesn't mean they don't care or that they won't grieve, but
it can
you
get
have these
hidden and
things in
buried, can't it? Under we've often talked about, the cares of the world. Really, that particular spark can somehow just get buried.
That's
I mean,
right.
it is that child. I mean, when Jesus said, unless you become like a child. I know that many of us are having to get rid of that idea of this goody-goody two-shoes child who stands obediently at the feet of Jesus, and that, as in many of the old pictures. But I mean, those of us who've had children know it's not as simple as that. But I remember, my father only had one trick. Do you remember? And he was a good grandfather to our children. And his trick was that he could produce a coin from behind their ear. Well, obviously, by the time they were about 6, this was waning a little as a thing of wonder.
While before they were 6,
but as small children,
Yeah,
absolute fascination. How could
absolutely.
it be?
Yeah.
Or making a coin move from one hand to the other and getting them to choose.
With our daughter, I used to lick the back of my hand, and then I would I would ask her to look at the top card on the pack, which she did. And then I would put my secretly licked hand back on it, and I'd say abracadabra and hit my hand, lift my hand with the card stuck to the back of my hand, and say, now look at the top card, and she would be amazed.
Until she was maybe 4.5, yeah.
Or 3.
But it is, yeah. I don't know. We can't get back to that, but it's interesting you saying about this lady so much older who and having dementia, that it was still in there, even if it was buried. I think some people think that these Alzheimer's, dementia, these things, people are happy in their vagueness, but actually, I know from my father that the level of anxiety when you're unsure who you are, where you are, and what's going on is pretty rough.
It was very, very difficult.
Yeah.
It was. And I do often think about Jesus and the conjuring tricks he did. He won't call them conjuring tricks, of course. They are the work of the Holy Spirit. They were God doing stuff.
One or two of them were quite like a conjuring.
Well, this is the point I'm going to make. That when it's very hard to put yourself in the position of those disciples. The people say, do you think that you should pay tax to Caesar or not? And Jesus comes out with this clever answer, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. He asks for a coin and whose head is on it. Oh, it's Caesar's head. Right, we'll give him his stuff and give God what is God's. Okay. Then he says, Jesus says to his disciples, anyway, look, I think we'd better pay the tax just to show we are part of the whole deal. And perhaps Peter said to him, well, there is one small problem. We don't actually have any money. And at this point, Jesus, and we're so used to it that we're almost blind to it. He says, and I don't know whether he waves his arms around and said it in a random sort of way, well, go and catch a fish. And Peter said, what? We know some people who would love to be told to go fishing by God. Lovely. But no, go and catch a fish, and whatever you find in its mouth, take it out and bring it. So he goes and casts his net or his rod or whatever it is. So that's the dog sneezing just behind us for some reason. And he comes back and he says, I found a gold coin, he said to the other disciples, in a fish's mouth. He told me to go fishing and I've got a gold coin. And Jesus was, yes, well, that's the whole point. Just let's pay the tax and let's move on to the next stage. But
I like the fact that miracle is included, because a lot of them are to do with healing people or allowing them to re-enter the temple or reconciliation with people that they've been separated from, and the widow of Nain, and making sure that she would have a life, because without her son she would have been penniless and etc., etc. And then you get this one, and it does feel like a conjuring trick, and it feels as though it would have been good fun for them. You know, it won't have changed. Well, maybe it did change their lives, being able to pay the tax. I don't know, but yeah, we had an absolutely lovely email this week, didn't we? Because last week we were talking about emotions, and we were talking about how sometimes, you know, we choose a sort of area in which we can, as followers of Jesus, we can show emotion, but it's a little bit limited. And we had this glorious email, didn't we, from somebody in Australia whose son he would describe it as intellectually disabled and autistic.
Yes, and he always sends us interesting stories about his life. I hope one day we might be able to meet. You never know. But and this was about scoring a goal. His son scoring a goal.
Oh, because we were talking about the football as well.
That's right,
and how exhilarating it can be to watch it. And of course, it was pretty exhilarating, wasn't it? Watching the Lionesses.
Oh, it was wonderful. They played so superbly.
Yeah. I mean,
so he says,
what will happen next, but
he says our intellectually disabled, as you said, autistic son decided a couple of months ago to start playing AFL, which, for those who don't know, is Australian football, which we saw while we were in Australia.
We didn't understand it.
It was incomprehensible, but we saw it. He says that there is an inclusive competition for people just like him, presumably autistic or disabled people. And he says, yesterday was his 4th game. This is the 2nd season for this team. Aaron is not good at this. He can kick the ball, but catching, he won't even try. Running, the player on crutches is faster than he is. It
conjures up such an image, doesn't it?
But yesterday, he scored his first goal to put the team in front, and they went on to win their first game ever. Oh, the emotion. There was a crowd of maybe 30 spectators, but it sounded like 30,000. There's always something, he says, about overcoming adversity that tugs at the heart. And the resurrection, of course, is such a story. This is, again, what he's saying. As if God has only ever wanted to tug at our heart.
Yeah,
It's a very interesting thought. Growing up in the church, he says, I was told that emotions are unreliable and that you need to... I was told that as well. And lovely, wild... rich course, emotions are unreliable.
And we were talking last week, weren't we, about some of the people who maybe got into terrible messes because they were emotionally driven, but at times, like the woman with the ointment, got it exactly right. Because intuitively and compassionately they knew the right moment and they knew what to do, and they broke through
King
all
David
the
was
normal
a bit like that,
barriers. Yeah.
So he says, I was told that emotions are unreliable at church, growing up in church, and that you need to rely on your mind and your intellect to understand the gospel. He says, personally, I think that's equally unreliable, not to mention virtually inaccessible, which is something people don't often talk about, for someone like Aaron.
Well, and for some of them like us, really.
The form in which we submit these emails makes us tick a box. I'm not a robot. Probably says it all, really. I'm so grateful to have had that email. Thank you so much.
But you know these boxes you have to tick to say I'm not a robot. I don't know what the effect is on other people, but you know, you're given 12 boxes and you're told to tick the ones that have got a car in it or the ones that have got a lamppost in it, and I become completely de-skilled and immediately think I won't be able to do it. You know, and then I'll look like a robot.
Well, I certainly know I'm not a robot when I do it, because I can't do it. Yeah.
I was thinking, you know, when I was reading that, because our son Joe, he worked with children with autism, didn't he? And lots of other, in inverted commas, syndromes for several years. And one of his most precious moments was there was a boy who was definitely way on the autistic spectrum and perhaps like this lad didn't achieve much, wasn't never asked to do any. Anyway, he was asked to read the lesson in church for the carol service, or one of the lessons, and and he went up very, very, not very confidently, and he managed it. And as he came down the aisle, you know how they celebrate after a football goal? Well, he was almost like that. Both arms in the air, looking both sides. Yay, 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 I've done it, hooray. Nobody would do that after managing to read a lesson in church. But rather like the lady with dementia, rather like this lad we've just been thinking about, the child suddenly glowed and the very best. And and I know for our son Joe, who did get weary sometimes. I remember he went on a bus journey once with a lad who only talked about washing machines.
That's
And
right.
that was from Brighton to the south of France on a coach. And I remember maybe his sense of wonder was slightly diminished by the end of
We
it.
had a lad at Scargill, didn't we, who made up a sort of album of photos of all the toilets and baths in the place.
Oh,
while
bless
he
his
was
heart, who
yeah.
came as a visitor.
It's very
yeah,
important to
yeah.
him. Yeah, actually, I have to say there was one occasion when we did see a round of applause and cheering during the reading of a lesson, and that was in the local church in Kettlewell,
In
where
Yorkshire.
this elderly man had great difficulty turning the page, and he read the beginning of the sentence, which was, "And he was filled with," and then couldn't get the page
It was
open.
Pentecost, wasn't it? Yeah.
And the vicar and everybody else were leaning forward, and eventually the vicar said, "Filled with what?" And he finally got it out and said, "The Holy Spirit," and everybody cheered and clapped in a way that no one ever has while they were listening to that piece
No.
before. That was great.
Yes. I would imagine all the angels were leading forward as well.
That's right, yes.
Yeah.
Filled with bacon, filled with
Filled with-
anger, filled with, I don't know,
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. I'm not quite sure where we're going with this really, but it's lovely to think of these moments, isn't it, where something unexpected happens, and that's coming back to the child really. I mean, you know, finding a tadpole can be pretty, it's like finding a little crab in a rock pool.
Yeah.
You know, amazing, you put your bucket in and suddenly there is a real thing in it.
Yeah, our son Joe, you'll remember very well, one of our other sons, we were down on the beach with where the rock pools were, and one
Our
of them,
eldest son
probably
was 5 and the next
Matthew,
one was about just over 1.
he said, "I've found a crab or something in a rock pool," and Joe, realizing that somehow you were able to find creatures in these strange rock pools, shouted out, "I found a camel!" So none of us argued with him, but we didn't check. But
No, but
his
we
wonder
suspect.
was as strong as anyone else's.
Yeah.
Myself, one of the things about wonder, I mean, losing wonder. I mean, I'm not an emotionally expressive person.
I'm glad you said emotionally expressive. You're a very emotional.
I am very emotional, yes, but I've grown up in churches where people raise their arms in services. Not all of them, but most of them. Not all people, but quite a lot. I don't think I've ever done that. Is it because I don't want to look silly? Because it isn't silly. I think it's more to do with the fact that emotion doesn't move my arms. It moves my heart. And I do remember being in Norwich Cathedral, that's right, once, and
I
the
knew it
sheer
was Norwich 'cause I can
joy
remember
and
it.
ecstasy of the music and the building,
Yeah,
I could almost feel my hands lifting
yeah.
towards the source of wonder, the source of magic. And so that was the only place where I've ever wanted to do that. So I do feel a sense of wonder about a number of things, but
Yeah,
perhaps
it's
not
interesting, isn't it? I mean, we
obvious
had
things.
an email this week from somebody who said, well, somebody we know quite well actually, who we often hear from, and she said that she's often reluctant to raise her hands, but she said, "You might say I lift my heart," and she said, "I know what Wesley means when he spoke of being lost in wonder."
Yeah.
And Yeah, what was it he said? Lost in
Wonder, love, and praise. I think it was,
Yeah, and I mean, whether he got his hands in the air, I don't know. But that moment of being lost is something that just captures you sometimes, doesn't it, really? And yet we are hearing, I don't know, we're hearing a lot, aren't we, Adrian, from people for whom that is not the case. I said about joy, wonder can be buried under a lot of stuff, and we had a couple.
It's very tough for somebody saying, and this by no means alone in saying this. I used to be a Christian once, and since that sentence is significant. But later I went through many events which made me hard to say what. I think I am still a believer, but I cannot call myself a Christian anymore. I am reminded that Marx once said memorably, I am not a Marxist. And whether Jesus would ever have wanted to say, in the face of the way in which he's represented, I'm afraid I have to say that I may not be a Christian.
I'm not the guy you think I am.
I'm not the person you seem to think I am.
You want me to be. Yeah. Yes, I mean, we did have another email just this week, didn't we, saying, among a huge crowd of people, I feel lonely and not needed. And part of this person knows it's not true, knows God is near, but they said it's hard not to feel that way when you feel that way. I do sympathy about that, That's how you're feeling, especially when everything we asked God for was not received. And that, I think, is for so many people, isn't it? It's that kind of disappointment and dull greyness. It's not necessarily hugely dramatic. It's more just a dullness that.
And there are no easy answers to that, because you don't know what people are measuring it against. Usually, disappointment is measured against something they've been told to expect.
Yeah.
Or something that they had very much wanted or needed.
You've prayed for, maybe, or
Well, there's no doubt that horrible things happen as God watches.
Yeah.
Things that people know they need and ask for. And it's
and
very,
not even
very
just
tough.
necessarily big horrible things, but just nothingy stuff. That maybe you think good things are happening for other people, and when is it going to happen?
I can't offer an answer to that, but I can say that, like the lady with dementia, the appetite for Jesus, the capacity for wonder, the desire to ask questions, the wanting to do things that are useful, and to embrace the kindness that I think is at the heart of what we say we believe. Those are all true, and those are the things that can still bring wonder into my heart. But I know no easy answers.
Do you know? I remember, Adrian, all those years ago when you'd had this breakdown. We were alienated from our church, and you wrote something, when does the joy start? And I was in despair at that. And then you wrote something else, and I won't probably have time to read all of it, but it was called Shades of Blue, and it starts, does winter end in seaside towns when councils paint anew the railings on the promenade in hopeful shades of blue? In other words, you've painted something bright blue, but does that mean anything?
Yeah.
And you go on to explore that in this poem, Shades of Blue. But the last verse, you say, the verse before last, are there machines for measuring the power of my prayers, and anyway, who cares? And then you wrote, I think you care, but gently. I think, because you do, the colour of my sadness is a hopeful shade of blue. And I think for a lot of people, it is still there.
Yeah, it's not an arm-raising thing, those words in that poem, but it is a reminder that it's still in us.
Yeah.
And to hold your nerve.
So those people
Hold your
who are
nerve.
writing to us at the moment, and obviously we'll try and write back, but hold your nerve. Hold
Yeah.
on, even if it's at the end of a string.
Yeah.
And we'll speak to you next week.
God bless you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.